Okay, this phenotype is formed by a combination of alleles which makes the genotype. So someone with brown hair can have the dominant allele, which we will denote as a capital B. And if it has two copies of this dominant allele, then it will have brown hair. But because this is dominant, it can also have one copy of the recessive allele and still be brown. Whereas blonde can only occur if you are homozygous recessive. Okay, so let's say your parents both have brown hair and are heterozygotes. What does heterozygous mean? Hetero means different, so that means you have one copy of each. So if the mother is heterozygous, then she is big B, little b. And if the father is heterozygous, then he also is big B, little b. And what color is their hair? Brown. Good. All right, what color hair will their children have? Okay, well, let's do a Punnett square. Okay, so for a Punnett square, you're going to put one parent and their possible genotypes across the top, and the other parent with their possible genotypes across the side. So what are the dad's possible genes that he can contribute? All right, you can do a big B and a little b. And what are the mom's that she can contribute? Big B and little b as well. And so now we can use this to determine what are the genotypes of the offspring just by filling in down and across the different genotypes. All right, so what are the possible hair colors of the children? What is this one? Brown. What is this one? Brown. What is this one? And this one? Blonde. Okay, so it's possible to have a blonde child even though both of the parents have brown hair. Yes?
Would their parents have to be blonde?
No, they just have to have this recessive gene which is not expressed, right? And if they both contribute a recessive gene to the sperm and to the egg, then they will end up with a blonde child.
Where do they get the recessive gene from?
They got it from their parents, but it was not expressed because they have the dominant one. Make sense? Okay.
Wait, so if their kid was blonde and they don't have a non-expressed gene for their color?
Yeah, so they both have a non-expressed gene.
But if their kid was blonde, so it has the little
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't have non-expressed genes.
Yeah, so it expresses blonde, right? Because both of them are blonde. But that's the only way you can get blonde hair, if you are recessive for both, or receive recessive from both your mother and your father. Okay, so we can use the rule of addition and the rule of multiplication to determine probabilities. In the rule of addition, what we're looking at is what's the probability of this event happening or this other event happening. So one way to look at this is what's the probability of this child being a blonde or being homozygous dominant. Okay? You can do this in your head, but what you're doing is the rule of addition. You're taking, what's the probability of them being, of the child being blonde? Yeah, 1 in 4, or 25%. And what's the probability of them being homozygous dominant? 25%, right? Big B, big B. It's 1 out of 4 as well. So the probability of them being blonde or homozygous dominant is what? The sum of the two individual probabilities. So 0.2 times 0.2 is 0.5, or 1 out of 2. We can then use the rule of multiplication to look at simultaneous events occurring at the same time. So this is questions that use the word and. So what's the probability of having a blonde boy? So they are blonde and boy. How would you figure that out? Okay, well, you take the probability of being blonde, which is 1 in 4, or 0.25, and multiply it by the probability of being a boy, which is 1 out of 2, or 1/2. You multiply those two together, and what do you get? 1 out of 8, right, or 0.025. So by using those two rules, we can determine probabilities of two events occurring at the same time, or one event occurring or another event occurring. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. So now we're going to switch gears and talk about a dihybrid cross. Okay? So this is looking at two genes. And so what Mendel did is he took peas that had, we're looking at two traits. One of them was for texture. Yes, we can use that. And one of them was for color. And he found a dominant and recessive relationship between the two. So the two options for texture were round, which is dominant, and he gave, we're going to call that a capital R, and wrinkled, which we're going to give the allele the little r. And then for color, there were two options, yellow, which is capital Y, and green, which was lowercase y. Okay, and what he did was he took two parent plants that were true breeding for each trait. So true breeding means they are homozygous. So the first parent would have been big R, big R, big Y, big Y. What is the phenotype of that individual? So that's the genotype. What did it look like? What was the phenotype? Round, yellow. Okay, good. And he crossed it with a homozygous recessive. Okay, what's the phenotype of that individual? Wrinkled green. And what were all the progeny would have been the same, right? So what are the progeny? What's the genotype of the progeny? That's the phenotype. But what were their genes? Big R, little big Y, little y. So they were all round and yellow, and they were all heterozygotes. Okay, so this is a dihybrid, meaning it has two hybrids. They're heterozygotes for two traits. Okay, so then what he did was he crossed the F1 generation, that was the F1 generation then, with each other to see what the ratio of the offspring would be. Okay, so to do this, we're going to have to make a bigger Punnett square. Both of the parents had the same genotype, but we want to determine the different combinations that each parent can contribute in their sperm or in their egg. And so to do that, we're going to use the FOIL method, first, outer, inner, last. Okay? So each of them could have done one of each of the first ones. So big R, big Y. Okay, one of the outer ones, big R, little y. One of the inner ones, big R, little r, big Y. And one of the last ones, little r, little y. Okay, so to do this, remember you want one of each trait and any different possible combination of each. Okay? Now the other parent had the exact same genes, so they could contribute, at least for this allele, the same different combinations as the first. So now, just like we did with the smaller Punnett square, we're just going to fill in each of the squares with the ones of the parents. So this is going to be big R, big Y, big Y. You just go down like so. Bless you. Okay, so now we have 4 different combinations for possibilities of their progeny. They can be round and yellow. They could be round and green. They could be wrinkled and yellow. And they could be wrinkled and green. And so we want to know what proportion or what's the probability of getting each? So to do that, we're just going to count up the phenotypes of the different possibilities that we have. So for example, this one on the top left, what is its phenotype? Big R, big R, big Y, it is, what's that? Louder. It's homozygous dominant, what's its phenotype? Round yellow. Okay, so I'm going to do a round yellow there. Okay, how about this next one to the right? Round yellow. In fact, all the way across and all the way down, we have round yellow. Okay, are there any other round yellows?
Yeah.
Yep, so there's one here and one here. I think that's the total. So how many total round yellows do we have?
9.
Good. All right, so now let's look for round greens. So for that, you need a big R and 2 little y's. So here's a round green, here's a round green, and here's a round green. So we have 3 of those. All right, wrinkled yellow, for that you need 2 little r's and 1 big Y. So one there, one there, one there. And then lastly, our wrinkled and green, we have 1 of those. Okay, so this shows that these 2 traits assorted independently, meaning the mothers and the fathers made all of these combinations at random, which occurs if they are on different chromosomes, so that they can go to different parts of the cell during meiosis at random. And if you had a ratio different than this, then the chromosomes would, or the genes would have to be doing something differently. And we'll see some examples of that later. But if they're in a dihybrid cross and they follow this dominant recessive pattern and they're on different chromosomes, then this is the ratio you're going to expect. Actually, before we move on. All that makes sense? So this is stuff you should have done in high school biology. May have been a while, but there it is. Okay, so let's say this. We're gonna switch gears again. Any questions about? All right, so let's say you have in pea plants, the big pea makes purple flowers, and the little p is the allele for white flowers. And they follow a dominant and recessive pattern. And you have a purple flower, or plant with purple flowers. And you want to know if it is heterozygous or homozygous. How would you figure that out? Okay, so take a couple minutes to talk to your neighbor. Okay, good. So you would do what's called a test cross, where you would breed with a homozygous recessive, or a plant that had white flowers. Okay, and let's say it was homozygous dominant. Okay, so your 2 options are homozygous dominant or homozygous recessive, right? So if you breed with a white flowered plant, What are the possible phenotypes if it is homozygous dominant? All of them would be purple. Exactly, and you can see that through doing the Punnett square. All of them would be heterozygotes, but would have one copy of the white allele and one copy of the purple allele. But if they're heterozygotes, what are the possible phenotypes of their progeny? Well, these ones will be what color? Purple, right. These ones will be what color? White. So if you do this test cross and you get white flowers, not all of them white, but some of them, then you'll know it was big P, little p, right? If they're all purple, then you know it was big P, big P. Okay, so doing the test cross, doing a Punnett square, doing a Punnett square with two traits, knowing what a homozygote, heterozygote, dominant, and recessive, that's all you need to know to complete the worksheet. Okay, so what we're going to do next